The following transmission contains unencrypted instances of explicit language.
Shall we begin?
Smiley is suspicious, Percy.
You won't know who to trust. Let's begin.
Welcome back, fellow spy nerds, to the Spies Like Us podcast. That is, of course, the podcast where we discuss the representation of tradecraft on screens, large and small. I believe today's film came out in the theaters. With me, of course, is my good online pal, Fred Kennedy. Say hi to the nerds, Fred.
Hi, fellow nerds. Good evening.
Why don't you tell us what movie we're going to watch real quick?
We're looking at the redacted report, and it's the word before report is redacted. The word is torture, and in keeping with the theme that we've been working on, from The Old Man to Zero Dark 30, we're going to dive in a little deeper to enhanced interrogation techniques, and the two films kind of overlap a bit.
Excellent. So just to be clear, the official name of the movie is simply The Report. That's what it's listed on as on Wiki, IMDb, etc. It was stylized. It's said to be stylized as The Torture Report with the word torture redacted. Amazon released this film, but I did check, and it did get a big theatrical release. Well, I don't know if it was a big one, but it did appear in theaters. So officially a large screen movie. It was came out in 2019. Mm-hmm. It covers, it's a historical claiming film, which covers events from 2009 to 2014. Of course, the events of the film are largely cycle around the researching and uncovering of events that happened much earlier. So we have actually some interesting overlap of the timeline with our previous episode on Zero Dark 30. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the places where how the films line up, sort of. Obviously, 2001 is the year of the 9/11 attack, which precipitates nearly all of this for both films. Zero Dark 30 runs events from 2002 to 2011, culminating with the death of Osama bin Laden. Then The Report runs events from 2009 to 2014, culminating in the release of a 6,700-page report on CIA's use of torture. The important thing to keep in mind or keep track of is that the main topic of the report is the same events that were dramatized in the first scenes of Zero Dark 30, most importantly, the ones between 2002 and 2005. Torture Report is produced by Vice Studios, which is interesting to me. I bet Fred probably doesn't know much or anything about Vice. It's Canadian, started out, I think, as a Canadian youth culture magazine that has since spawned into a respectable small to mid-size media empire, including they have a podcast where they do some really, really incredible journalism that I think rivals anything you get from the networks. They had, for instance, there was right when Ukraine was invaded, they had people over there. They did 45 minutes of nothing but interviews with Ukrainian refugees. And that's kind of their style, is they just want to give you like the straight stuff, like unfiltered and narrated. So they didn't talk.
It sounds like they got the jump. Sounds like they got the jump on the regular news bureaus.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And I just like their kind of style of their podcast is they tend to do that kind of thing where they didn't bother trying to give like context for the war or talk about how terrible it was or, get into the mind of Putin. They just gave you 45 minutes of interviews with detainees. They let the story just tell the story. Mm-hmm. So really interested to see their name on a big budget movie like this. Didn't start out with a distributor. This, as you might imagine, didn't go through the regular studio system. But it did well at Sundance and was picked up by Amazon. The director, Scott Z. Burns, got his start in advertising, and he was part of the team that came up with Got Milk. Interesting. He was the producer of Al Gore's and Inconvenient Truth, and several of his screenplays. He does dabble in these kind of politically charged waters. Several of his screenplays were directed by Steven Soderbergh, who is the producer of this film. And I'm going to go context light on this. We're going to skip over all the actors and stuff because I do want to get into the main material. So just last thing before heading into the briefing room is a park bench check. I do believe that this movie passes the park bench test of the Spies Like Us podcast because we have a scene at 23 minutes in. There's the scene with Jones meeting with the FBI guy that initially nabbed Al-Qaeda's Zubaydah. Actually, check me on that. Did that guy actually turn out to be Al-Qaeda?
I'm not sure.
Zubaydah? Okay. And their conversation takes place, even though it's like right out in the middle of DC, but they are sitting at a water fountain, which even though it's not like said in the film or suggested that they're specifically there to take advantage of the white noise that the fountain would produce, such a place is a good spot to have a conversation if you don't want to be recorded.
That's Sofan, right? The man, the FBI agent is Sofan, correct?
Yeah.
SOU. Right.
So maybe I should actually contrast this with Zero Dark 30 again really quick. Sorry, before we get to the tradecraft. Both films purport to be dramatizations of historical events. Interestingly, Zero Dark 30 renamed just about everyone in the film, possibly for legal reasons. In this film, everyone that's named is based on the person of the same name in that role, except for one, and that's Gina Haspel, who later became the director of the CIA. That's the character played by Maura Tierney, who, for who knows why, I couldn't find a reason, is renamed Bernadette in this. Could possibly have had something to do with the fact that she was the director of the CIA when this film was made. All that being said, when looking at the tradecraft, I'm not a historian. I'm not a journalist. So I'm going to I've tried to analyze the tradecraft of this film in the same way I would if I was looking at a piece of fiction. So if what they're doing seems like it makes sense, I'll give it a thumbs up. If it doesn't look like it makes sense, I'll give it a thumbs down, regardless of whether.
So we're going right to tradecraft?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Retinal scan complete. Validating security clearance. Clearance granted. You may now enter the briefing room.
Our main character is played by Adam Driver, and I forget his first name. I just have Jones written here.
Dan, I think. Is it Dan?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Dan Jones. At the beginning of this film, we see how he first makes a strong impression on Senator Feinstein with his work on a set of CIA videotapes that were destroyed in 2005. It's based on that work that Feinstein, who in this time period has the position of chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. She gets, based on that work of the destroyed CIA tapes, she gets a yay vote on a further investigation of the CIA's Enhanced Interrogation Techniques program, which she also asks Jones to spearhead. I believe you had some notes on what Jones, how he's first introduced to how he's going to be interacting with the CIA.
Yeah, supposedly every relevant document he is told when he's escorted into the workroom that he'd have access to every relevant document. And so a lot of the He finds out too that some of the tapes were destroyed, so all he could go by are some of the CIA's own documents. And when he gets ushered into the room, a couple things he's alerted to. Number one, he looks around and he sees the computers, but there are no printers or paper. And he said, at some point, I'll have to have printers and paper. And the guy says, this stuff has to stay here. And he says, again, at some point, I'll have to have that. And he just gets an icy stare. The other thing he finds out from the man who escorts him in there, undoubtedly from the CIA, is that that he'll have the stuff. It came out in conversation that they'll have to vet things, and that kind of alerts him. And he says, "I was under the understanding. What do you mean vet? I was under understanding that I'd have access to all relevant information." And he makes the point that comes out later by a CIA director that, well, we can't have you be looking at everything, which is kind of a red flag.
I mentioned this room a little bit. This is something they call a SCIF in the film. That's acronym SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. And although I don't think it's quite as secure as it should be, I like the concept. This hadn't come up in any of our previous movies. But this room is like the sole interface that Jones is going to be allowed to have. Like, everything for his investigation has to come out of this room, and everything that goes into the room is put there by the CIA. Again, like after a vetting process that you mentioned. It's established here in the agreement too, Jones is not going to be permitted to question any of the participants of the EIT program. The reason they give, of course, is that the DOJ is investigating the program as a potential criminal matter. And initially, they kind of believe, naively, I guess, that DOJ will be working alongside the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, but that cooperation never materializes. So what they were hoping he could wrap up in a year, when he was assuming that, it would eventually come out, he'd get interviews or, records of interviews with the people who were actually involved. He never gets this. So he has to compile his report entirely on CIA files, emails, memos, and for that reason, I mean, it takes a whole 5 years for him to complete. You mentioned too, you in your notes, you say it's a foreshadowing of trouble that the CIA guy says, well, we're going to have to vet everything, before we give it to you. I noticed though, it does seem like the film is making me say like, hey, what the hell? What are they going to hold back? But in point of fact, it doesn't seem like they actually hold back anything, including the Panetta review, which becomes a key dramatic point of the film later. It was just sitting right there for them to.
It's also, I remember you asked me this question early on. I think you asked me, where does he get it? And I was under the assumption it was all right there. But then I wasn't sure if he got it from that senator, when they use it to very ingeniously make that internal study known when the CIA disavows it. Senator Udall, I think it was. Yeah. So I wasn't sure if, in fact, he did find it on his own without any vetting, or because I remember you asked me that, where he got it. And I thought he got it on his own. But then I thought, well, maybe Senator Udall somehow came up with it.
I did find the answer.
Okay.
Although thinking about it, so I'm going to tell you the straight answer, and then I'm going to give maybe some of my questions about it. Although we want to have a chunk of time to talk specifically about the Panetta review later. Right now, we'll just say it's a key piece of document in the story of this film. And it's a document that even though he just finds it on their server, like it just arrives with the rest of the CIA memoranda. But the CIA gets really, really flipped out when they find out he has it. So I don't know. Now I have questions. Now I'm not sure what happened in reality, because if they were vetting the stuff, which I think they should have, they should never have given him the Panetta review if they didn't want him to have it. If they The way they get flipped out, like it seems like they don't have any record of having given it to him. So it's possible, I'll just put a tiny pin in possible, maybe he didn't get it from that skiff. Maybe it was passed to him by some source, and the film just does not want to.
That's and the only logical source would be that Senator Udall, because when they go to that Senate hearing,
Except I know for sure he gives it to the senator.
Okay, I thought so too, but I couldn't think of any other way. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And that's basically the setup. That's his job. He's going to spend 5 years.
Although I don't know if we want to go. I don't know if we want to go toward when the new CIA officer is confirmed. He has some argument about some of the conclusions, even though he says EIT was regrettable and so on. And he first of all says he thought it did give some information, that the IT program did give some information that saved lives. And he was trying to say that it wasn't as bad as the report made it out to be. And then when the Adam Driver character says, well, you've seen, I've got all my reports from CIA people. This is all CIA information. And then he says something about the whole vetting thing, which comes back again and says, you don't think we give you everything. All right. So, which makes me think that either they did vet or the CIA director was lying. I know, Todd, you think he was lying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be part of the lack of accountability after the fact, which is.
But yeah, I brought it up now because it goes back to that whole question of, was there vetting and did he have everything, that kind of a thing, and so that's why I threw that in at this point.
Sure. Well, I guess we don't and can't necessarily know, but given that he did, well, I mean, he's going through like millions of documents, to be honest. But if there were major things missing, I would think they would make themselves known by their absence somehow. Jones is looking at the records of hundreds, at least, right, of detainees that went through this program. The film focuses on 3 specifically, and even though he probably was finding out different things about the different 3 at different times, to make a more compact narrative, both in the film and in our podcast, they kind of take them one at a time. We've got Zubaida Gul Rahman.
Yeah, and he shows up in 0 Dark 30. He was the connection that supposedly KSM had with Bin Laden.
Okay, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and definitely believed to be one of the principal planners of 9/11. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and I think he was that one infamously that we kept seeing in the papers that looked like Bluto with the wife beater T-shirt on, and you know who I mean. I think that was he.
Okay.
We kept seeing his picture. I think that was KSM.
So yeah, let's start with Zubaida, and he's presented here as like basically the first detainee. So if you're going to tell this story, obviously start at the beginning. He's arrested by the FBI in 2002. CIA does not seem happy about the fact that the CIA seems to have gotten ahead of them in grabbing this guy and seem to go really overboard in interrogating him. We have these 2 contractors, previously Air Force personnel,
psychologists,
who later went into the field of psychology, Mitchell and Jessen. And I want to say, I have to underline, like, they come off as extraordinarily slimy in this film.
Yeah.
Um, this is maybe
And the
like
CIA is too quick to accept their questionable science.
right, and like Tim Blake Nelson says at some point, like, what science,
Yeah,
really?
yeah,
But yeah, so these are the guys that come up with all the techniques and demonstrate them to the CIA, who then adopts them, and that includes again all the hits, stress positions, loud noises, sleep deprivation, denial of proper toiletry necessities, and of course, infamously, waterboarding. Um, and like I said, if the film really is painting a clear villain, I think it's these two guys.
yeah, and especially I think getting back to Sufan, right, where they talk to him, Sufan stresses, and the CIA gets bent out of shape when they find out that he got the first turn. This Sufan, the FBI agent, stresses that the way to interrogate is to develop a rapport with these guys, right? Not to torture, not to hurt, to develop a rapport. And you know, he talks about they had a box. They told him his house was bugged. He produced a box full of blank cassette tapes, which were blank, but he made him think that they had all these tapes on him and knew that he was connected. And his point was, we got further with that than EIT. And the CIA knew that. And the CIA, although when they found out, they were enraged that, they even got first hit on this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, at the risk of spoilers, we find out at the end that the CIA comes to the same conclusion that Sofan said at the very beginning. You have to develop rapport with these guys.
It's really annoying because, that building of rapport is actually like what the CIA does do well. In the development of willing assets, or
Assets.
not necessarily willing, but even coerced assets.
Right, especially
But there's that
foreign
whole
ones.
element, and when they're first faced with this situation and their new task to like extract information from detainees, somebody makes the point in the film, like, this isn't what how do we do that? This is not what we do with the CIA. And that's why they have to bring in these contractors. And I wanted to make the point that I think number 2 coming off not too good in this film is Bernadette, aka Gina Haspel, who more than anyone else plays the trusting and defensive of the two contractors and their methods.
Yeah, she's an apologist.
The story that's told by the CIA in their reports doesn't make sense. They claimed at the time that he was number 3 in Al Qaeda, and that wasn't true. And they also, in their own reports, according to Jones, never learned anything from the EIT and the torture that he was subjected to.
And it was that labeling of him as third or fourth in Al Qaeda that got the justification and the green light to go ahead with the EIT program, and that they could go harder. So, and what that was false. And it turned out that he wasn't even an officer in Al Qaeda. But that got them in, that lie that he was third or fourth ranked in Al Qaeda, to go ahead with the justification they gave to the Justice Department to go harder with those 2 Air Force psychologists.
Yeah, and they only had, Jones says later, they only had one source that claimed he was number 3 in Al Qaeda, and that guy later recanted.
Exactly. It goes back to what I said before. It just seems so unnecessary. And I go back to, how so many times we say, oh, that's 2020, as if we didn't have any other way of learning the truth until we made that mistakes. This shows us that there were voluminous, including the CIA's own internal report, information back to the 70s that said not only didn't it work, but it was inhumane. And everything that the whole FBI was saying about developing a rapport, they had a voluminous amount of information that was at their fingertips, and they went ahead and did it anyway. That's what really struck me as the sad part, going to the old adage that is what we learn from history is that we don't learn from history.
Nathan Raymond, a physician's assistant who was involved in the Zubaida proceedings, reaches out to Jones, privately, and don't quote me, don't use my name. He like just grabs a quick conversation with him in a parking garage or something.
How many times have parking garages been used from Deep Throat to virtually every other? You talk about park benches, parking garages, I think, are the next park bench. But anyway, yeah.
No, you're right. You're right. We should start counting those too. We definitely have a parking garage in this major scene at the end of this film. Well, anyways, Nathan Raymond, he tells Jones that they weren't waterboarding correctly. Waterboarding is supposed to give the patient, the subject. Sorry, I don't want to say patient. The subject, the impression that they're drowning. But he says no, the guy was actually drowning.
Right.
And notice too, and Jones asks him about the doctor's thing. Remember, I talked about this a little in Zero Dark 30. Like, I said, like, I believed the CIA would really only do this in like, kind of clinical conditions with a physician present. Here, I find out like, no, that's not true because Nathan Raymond tells Jones, the AMA will not allow doctors to participate in EIT. And so, a physician's assistant, which is what Raymond is like the closest thing they can get to that kind of thing. And
they're virtual doctors. That was just a technicality that the CIA and the AMA was dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Those guys are virtual doctors.
What do you mean? When you say virtual, you mean they're just as good as?
They know enough about medicine where they can make, like he knew that was drowning, right? They know enough about medicine that they can make doctoral type of observations and decisions is all. It was just one of those technicalities and loopholes that they used to get around it.
I just want to say that I think that to anyone in the CIA, the fact that the AMA will not allow doctors to participate in those procedures should have been all the big red flag that they should have needed.
What's the vow? The vow is do no harm. Right. They have to take that vow. And I'm not sure if a physician assistant has to take it. Maybe that's it right there. The vow that's a Hippocratic oath, right? They take a vow to do no harm.
That's right.
So
that's
maybe that's it right there, Todd.
And our slime balls, Mitchell and the other guy are claiming that the techniques, in fact, do no harm. And the CIA is standing on that. Well, in that case, like, why are you taking the word of these two psychologists who have never actually been involved in actual interrogation ever? They had no experience. The only experience they had was in running programs training Air Force personnel how to resist interrogation. So it's not like
that's the that EIT, or is it the evasion something? Yeah, and they reversed engineered the evasion something. In other words, when a pilot or resistance, an airman goes down,
survival. It's like
evasion resistance.
Yes.
CER. Right.
Yeah, SEER. It's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape.
Right.
So it's not like they didn't know anything, so they had that level of expertise that could have fooled a credulous CIA into thinking they knew what they're talking about.
Well, the other thing, a psychologist doesn't have any medical. A psychiatrist does. A psychiatrist can prescribe medication. He's an MD first, right? But a psychologist is not a doctor.
Right.
And those guys were psychologists.
You have notes on a rebuff to Cheney.
Well, what I say is, in a rebuff to Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Catherine Bigelow, who directed Zero Dark 30, who allege that it all started in 2002 when Abu Zubaydah and a detainee they called Riyadh, the facilitator, who tipped them off to Abu Ahmed in Kuwait, who had ties to bin Laden. The movie through Jones says that didn't happen. What really happened was, number one, The CIA was on al-Kuwaiti's phones, emails, and identity long before they captured any detainees and before they even had an EIT program. Number two, Zubaydah told us al-Kuwaiti had nothing to do with bin Laden, same with KSM and others. Then there was a public rollout memo that stated that the agency wanted their PR people to connect bin Laden raid to intel obtained by way of EITs before it even happened, which is kind of crazy. And the CIA lied to both Bush and the Obama administration about the EIT program yielding intelligence that got us bin Laden. So those were the big rebuffs to, like I said, Catherine Bigelow, Rumsfeld, and Cheney.
Right, just tying that into Zero Dark 30 in their narrative, it's Abu Ahmed that leads them to Zubaydah, that leads them to
through interrogation,
al-Kuwaiti, that
through EIT
gets them the courier. Yeah. And in this film, the character of Daniel Jones is saying none of that is right. And although in his timeline Zero Dark 30 hasn't come out yet.
Right.
He's already flagging all.
Oh, they show the clip. Yeah, they show the brief clip of the movie. Do you remember in the torture report?
I do.
Yeah, and that was kind of a, I think, slam, kind of a knowing jab at them. Because he goes up to that whiteboard, Jones does, and starts refuting all of those claims made by those folks. Right. Getting back to the physician assistant.
Sure.
In the end, when he has the conversation with, what's the woman's name? You said they changed her name.
Gina Haspel is renamed as Bernadette in this film.
Right. And she puts up her, apologist role about those two crackpots. And what I thought was interesting is his last argument is what the military brass uses. And I call it the John McCain argument, who they use in a real clip at the very end of the movie. In other words, the military brass has always been against torture for the sake of our military people. When they get captured, right, we're supposed to follow the Geneva Convention rules on captivity and on war and on capture. And if one of our prisoners starts to invoke that, a la John McCain in the Hanoi Hilton, we will be rebuffed and laughed at if it's known that we don't honor that and that we use torture in Abu Ghraib or Gitmo or other places. So he makes that final argument that I call the military brass John McCain argument. And I think it's noteworthy that at the very end, they show the real John McCain at the very end, because we know the hell he went through at the Hanoi Hilton.
Right. So that's Zubaydah, who's just presented as our first detainee, someone that just never needed to be interrogated in the first place. The FBI had a crack at him, and they got further, right, than with their methods of developing rapport. It does look like they would have gotten to the truth a lot faster. And the truth, it looks like, would have been, this guy is actually of very low value and doesn't really know anything that we need to know this bad. So that's our case of a guy that really shouldn't have been in the program in the first place. Our next case that they highlight here is of Gul Rahman. He's shown as a case of the mishandling of the EIT program in that it led to his death. Yeah, a minor detail. And they were all, that was one of the big things of John Yoo and also those two Air Force guys, is that if it doesn't work, right, they shouldn't die, right, if it works. So their logic comes back at them, and I think Jones makes that point. If they die, it doesn't work because you're not supposed to kill them or give internal harm to organs and so on. So right away with his death, kind of puts hole in the whole rationale to begin with. Right. And here's an interesting one too in regards to the access to the documents that Jones had, because in this film, they notice Gul Rahman's case mainly because of the absence of documentation. They notice a disappearance of him from the records. So, in point of fact, at whatever they did cobble together and put together the story of what happened to Gul Rahman, possibly came from other sources, which, by the way, would have been it would have technically been a violation of the agreement between the Senate and the CIA. But yeah, he asks, as you say, the legal rhetorical question also, why of Feinstein, why do they need to cover it up if they're following standard operating procedure? Why didn't they
Right.
tell the committee? Why didn't they tell
Dies of
you?
hypothermia.
Mm-hmm. It's a very ugly looking cover up on the part of the CIA. I'm still not quite sure why this isn't like the one of the big key things the movie focuses on. A lot of this movie is so much of like Jones sitting down and telling Feinstein terrible shit, um, in a way that it's kind of hard to maintain like audience interest when you
Um,
know, yeah,
yeah. Well, the thing I know, and I've read some of the criticisms of that, and I've heard different people say, oh, it's most of it's people sitting in rooms talking, but what they're talking about to me was riveting, and I call it a morality play. And I said from the beginning, you're going to lose some audiences because there's no car chases, right? There's no shoot 'em ups, right? But I just think it's a morality play, and if you look at it on that basis, yeah, you're going to lose some audiences because you don't have all those action scenes. But on its own, I think it's a very good morality play because it has to do with who we are, what we strive to be, what our ideals are, right?
100
And when we break away from
100%.
those ideals, what do we do about it? So um, that's kind of my take on the fact that about a lot of people talking and no car chases.
100%. And um that's a feature, that's a facet of movie making. I don't want to struggle for the exact right word, where Sundance, it started out as a celebration of independent film. It still is that. It's where people take movies that they were gonna make anyways, even if it didn't connect with an audience.
Yeah,
This film wanted to be made, and there's people that will fund those projects, and then they take it to Sundance, and you know what, if it does well there, then maybe they find a distributor. Maybe someone has enough faith in the product. But it is definitely, as opposed to, for instance, like a Marvel movie or a Disney movie, where they already have counted the popcorn receipts and the ticket receipts
yeah.
before they even start making the
And,
film.
and and I cynically also say a lot of these movies are preaching to the converted anyway. The people who should see it won't see it, and that's kind of another caveat.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I do really like this scene though, where when Feinstein asks Jones, like, she says, "Are you? It sounds like you're accusing the CIA of murder." And he doesn't come out with a flat yes, but his response causes her to leave the room in a very interesting fashion. I don't know if you
Mhm.
noticed this.
Yeah.
Really great performance by National Treasure Annette Bening. She says, "This is all very disconcerting. I'm going to have to review this later," and very, very
Hmm.
quickly, like, removes herself from the room. I like that subtlety of that performance, where this is a senator that realizes, like, she has just stepped into something that politically she is not ready to hear any more about.
This mhm. This goes back to plausible deniability, uh, which Condoleezza Rice and others helped Bush achieve. Right, that whole plausible deniability
Oh yeah,
with John Yoo and the whole rationalization and hair splitting of torture that John Yoo came up with, um, so that Bush could say that he knew nothing about it.
right. Well, tell us more about John Yoo, because at this part of the film, at least, the film does jump around in time, but it tries to keep kind of a logical a narrative. It seems to be, whether or not it's true in the timeline of the movie's narrative, it seems to be after Gul Rahman's death that they're consulting with you. And who is John Yoo also, by the way?
He's with the Office of Legal Counsel. Okay,
I think
he's
he's
a
white.
lawyer
I think
that's
he's
brought in.
White House. What branch would that be? Pretty sure that's
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. He's from the Office of Legal Counsel. He's a lawyer, and he has brought in to give a narrower, hair-splitting redefinition of torture and interrogation techniques that Bush didn't learn about anyway till 4 years later. He argues that because it's not of the intent of the interrogator to cause severe pain or suffering, right? Which is how torture is described in this official memo he has, 2340, but to gain intelligence and save American lives, that it's not torture. He zeroes in on the word severe and says that 2340 doesn't define severe. So he then looks and finds another definition, which is in a Medicare statute that says severe pain and suffering is acute symptoms that place the individual in serious jeopardy and are hard to endure. Then he takes a big leap, what I think is a major medical jump to conclusion by you. He says, the rationale that constitutes torture is that the damage must rise to the level of organ failure, impairment of bodily functions, or death, which of course does occur with detainee Gul Rahman, right, who died of hypothermia in 2002.
That's right.
After the CIA interrogators left him chained to the ground overnight in 36 degrees Fahrenheit cell. Jones says that their legal argument, and Jones comes back after he hears this and said their legal argument said intense interrogation wouldn't cause bodily harm. So how long does Gul Rahman have to be dead for? And in other words, he turns their own logic on their head. And then you goes on to say that the president could do virtually anything if he believed it was to save American lives or a plane from crashing into a building. Like, I don't necessarily want to name some of his examples, but
we'll skip those. They're pretty gruesome.
He said, in our opinion, if torture provides unique intelligence that saves lives and doesn't cause lasting harm, then it's legal for the president to order it. And then he defines unique as intelligence that couldn't be obtained any other way.
Right, which is its own kind of Ouroboros bullshit logic. I had this note for later, but I feel like I'll bring it up now. Haspel does have at least a tiny little bit of come to Jesus moment where she comes up with the observation that, like, so if there was because of the definition of unique intelligence, meaning you couldn't get it any other way, that kind of means you can't find out if what you did was legal until after you did it, right? And that does at least raise
183 later, and then they go back to the FBI's. In the end, it's almost like they glibly and flippantly say, "Oh yeah, I think it's better now that we use rapport," which the FBI was saying right from the beginning. That was so glib in the end when they, like it's like, oops,
Right. Our third detainee is KSM. Again, that is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And his is a case of maybe actually having the right guy, right? And an important guy. But the techniques they use being absolutely ineffective and unwarranted. They find, first of all, Jones finds out that the CIA knew about KSM since 1995. So any of the claims that they learned about him and his importance from torturing other detainees.
Well, that goes back to 9/11. He starts out by saying that's when they remember the whole connecting the dots, right? He goes way back to 9/11, saying basically that the CIA knew about him back then and his connection to bin Laden, but they didn't connect the proverbial dots. So he goes way back to that, even before the detainee project.
Yeah, I'm sure he was in the files that the outgoing Clinton administration was supplying the incoming Bush administration. You see the guy in this film flipping out when 9/11 happens, being like, what the fuck? What did we tell them when they were coming in? We told them, Osama bin Laden determined to attack within the United States. And the Bush administration completely ignored all that stuff and got to work on
we also
Iraq.
found out about the turf war between FBI and CIA. And in hindsight, here we go, 2020 hindsight, if they had shared information, right, they could have connected those proverbial dots of those guys that were taking one-way airplane pilot lessons, right? They had all the information, but they jealously, the CIA and FBI, weren't sharing their information. That was a big part of the 9/11 report. And supposedly that was going to be cleared up after that.
Right. I see in your notes, a reminder that a CIA officer who was handling a unnamed asset, we call him Asset X in here in Islamabad, claimed to have direct KSM, but was turned down when he asked for a measly $2,000.
You know what that reminded me of?
What's that?
That Moroccan intelligence. Remember that supposedly got lost in the shuffle when those brothers with the beard, remember that? I think her name was Debbie, came and said, oh, this is Moroccan intelligence about the brothers with the beard and that they got the wrong one, right? It reminded me of that they had taken another look at. That's what that reminded me of. Also, how they ignored the intelligence that bin Laden was in a cave in Tora Bora. Remember, they dismissed that too, which turned out to be true.
Right. And, the $2,000 that they could have handed over would have been a lot cheaper than the cost of this program, which I believe ends up, I think the contractors walk away with like $80 million or something on that. And
when they pay him later, they pay him later and he sends a text to a CIA handler saying, I'm with KSM. And
just like
it had
that.
nothing
Just
to
like
do
that.
with torture.
Just like that. Instant.
Yep.
FBI.
Yeah. Well, number one, KSM told them what they wanted to hear to make the torture stop, which is another argument against torture. They watered him 183 times and only then concluded KSM may never be forthcoming. Again, the FBI could have told them that. Everything they got from him was either a lie or something they already had. Feinstein rhetorically asks, if it works, why do you need to do it 183 times? And Jones hopes, this is the naive part, that when the report comes out, that maybe, just maybe, people will finally see that the answer to Feinstein's question above, which is, like I say, kind of naive.
Yeah, I think the 183 times number, which is not disputed, is incredible in the face of the CIA's story about them believing that what they were doing was in any way effective or necessary. There's no way. It beggars belief to me, and goes to the lack of accountability in here or something. But just that number all by itself. If every time they waterboarded him, they got some new piece of useful intelligence, then I guess, but they didn't. And at some point, when do you decide that it's ineffective?
Well,
I think that single number literally destroys all the CIA's arguments.
Well, and it's worse than that too, Todd, because add that to the internal memo, right? The Panetta report, right? Mm-hmm. Add that to the 1970s study of the CIA that said torture doesn't work, right? And add that to what the FBI said. There's a laundry list of things that they already knew even before the 183. So that's why I keep coming back to, you can never say, 2020 hindsight. No, you had hindsight. Yeah. You had to. You can't just rub it off. And you chose to do it anyway. That's the cynical part of it for me. You chose to do it anyway. And I made the parallel to the Pentagon Papers. Pentagon Papers of Vietnam. McNamara requested a study of the Vietnam War from start to finish, or from the 1945 into the 60s. And the whole report told them that it was not only unwinnable, but the regime we were backing was illegitimate. And they still went ahead and did it anyway. So that's why I'm really cynical about a lot of things. People say, "Oh, if we only knew," or hindsight. No, so many times they do know better, and they go ahead and do it anyway. That's the part that really bothers me about so many of these screw-ups.
Well, in our next section, we're going to be talking about what I call the Swiss cheese of accountability that's in here. I decided it would be smart for us to talk about accountability in two ways. First of all, what was going on before and during the lack of accountability there. And then I want to talk about the lack of accountability afterwards when some of the facts start coming out. But just before we get there, I'm going to again say, same note I had in Zero Dark 30. I think that the depictions of the torture rooms are actually a little bit absurd and unbelievable. They're portrayed as being these dingy, poorly lit, highly unsanitary dungeons. I don't know the reality of what happened, but I find it hard to believe. I find it much easier to believe that the directors are finding this to be just more psychologically gripping to audiences. Because if I have a prisoner and I think he's a very high value, I don't want him dying of a fucking infection.
Well, part of this could be written off as the cheap production standards too, right? This was a low budget film, so maybe that was part of their not doing a good job on those torture rooms or whatever.
That's true.
I don't know.
That's true, and also, pretty small budget. I think they started out with thinking they were going to have 26 million, cut that to 18, and shot the entire film in just 25 days.
Yeah. So again, most of it was a lot of guys talking. So when they try to do something a little beyond that, maybe they weren't up to it, whether it's a car chase or a torture scene.
Yeah. You gotta have some
production values,
some spice in the soup, especially when the subject matter here really could it's hard subject matter to dramatize. It really is. Yeah. And it's I think it's a testament to the filmmakers and the actors that they do as good a job as they could of basically almost what could have been just an unending series of Jones telling Dianne Feinstein some scary shit. So accountability that the road that they built, the bridge that they built between not torturing people and torturing people is so shaky and so full of holes. But I do want to talk about it and talk about how I think this happened. But very early on and throughout the movie, Jones is seeing the blanking out of important bridges to accountability. Strong examples being like keeping Powell in the dark. What was that memo? I think it came from Cheney or somebody related to the vice president's office. Like, we can't tell Powell about this because he will flip the fuck out. And
they already humiliated him when they made him do that. What was it? Uranium cake thing at the UN, about Iraq.
Big time. And
it tarnished his before then, really pure reputation. So I guess they knew better than to let him know about that.
And they're building barriers between them and George Bush because there seems to be an impetus to not do anything that would put the president's re-election
plausible deniability, and he had it. He was able to say that he knew nothing.
And that to me seems to be the honestly, like the source of the way John Yoo looked at the program. Like he just came up with an analysis that meant that in no possible scenario could you blame my boss, the president.
I think they had a trial run with Iran-Contra. Remember, supposedly Reagan didn't know about the arms for hostages deal with Iran, and people were questioning that, right? Let alone dealing with Iran and then selling the proceeds of that money to the Contras in South America. So I'm sure they took a page out of that book. Whether you believe, and there was a big question about whether Reagan knew about that. I don't know. You were probably pretty young during that time, but that whole plausible deniability was huge back then, and I'm sure they were very aware of it in this one too. Condoleezza Rice didn't want them to tell. Now, blowback, basically, and you see this a lot with the CIA, is something that goes on beyond bad tradecraft. I know we have our tradecraft, but what I think blowback is usually represents some long-term unanticipated damage that was self-inflicted by the CIA, of which there are far too many. Now, in The Old Man, the blowback that the CIA did was they armed those warlords against the Soviet Union, but then it blew back on them with Osama bin Laden and his crew having weapons, and that was a whole other thing. So that's blowback. When the CIA does something and it comes back, it's a self-inflicted wound. So what I view as blowback here is what Adams says. Jones points out that instead of saving lives, what the CIA actually did while practicing EIT was made it impossible to prosecute a mass murderer like KSM, because if what we did to him came out in a court of law, the case would be over. And the other thing was the guy who planned 9/11 was turned into a recruiting tool due to his EIT treatment for a war we're still fighting. Like so many of the prisoners in Gitmo, who, if they weren't terrorists, would be when they came out, right? That's right. That's why Lindsey Graham and others are saying there's no way. That's why they're in this purgatory, because there's no way to release them now. I remember they first tried to try them in a court in New York, then they moved them to Gitmo. So I think it was true. They swept up a lot of innocent people who weren't terrorists, but if they were let go now, they would be. So again, those are two examples of what I call blowback. When the CIA does something and it comes back to haunt them in another way, and it's usually a self-inflicted wound.
Yes.
And like I say, that goes beyond bad tradecraft, because it's more of a permanent thing. Blowback is more of a longer lasting thing than bad tradecraft.
Yeah, but I think it definitely factors in when I give plus and minus spy points around here. I see my further note here on the CIA getting their justification from John Yoo. Again, as I just mentioned, like John Yoo's just there to make sure the president is insulated legally. To their credit, the CIA guys seem to have gone to him specifically to make sure hey, are we doing this right? Are we breaking the law? Are we doing unconstitutional bullshit? But again, he's got that motivation of giving them as much leash as they want. But the problem there to me is that in that case, with them getting that opinion from John Yoo, if you think about it, it actually kind of becomes unpatriotic for these guys to not use the enhanced interrogation techniques. You follow?
Yeah.
This is a big problem with the accountability with the different agencies. Is I think everyone up and down the chain, it kind of reminds me of the stories of the fucked up automobile factories in Detroit, where they had the whole policy of just throw it over the wall to the next person in the assembly line and let them deal with it. In this case, I think it's more of a case of the people at the ground in this whole chain of things, from the actual agents all the way up to the president. I think the agents at the bottom of the chain are assuming that the president is completely read in on what they're doing. He's not. there are many holes and disconnects between the two. The president is, Bush is assuming that, what he's hearing is valid. Everyone's going based on what they're being told by the person next to them, but it almost too like a game of telephone, with the exception of Cheney and Addington and that whole fucking thing where they're trying to keep Powell and Bush out of it. I don't think any of it's really intentional. It's not a masterminded plot to uh, obfuscate and conceal. I think that in reality, like, almost everyone here is just doing their job for the country as a public
Ex-
servant as best as they know how.
Except the CIA knows, okay? They knows when the shit hits the fan, okay? Because of that very plausible deniability of the president and the upper administration, it's going to be their head on the chopping block. That's why and the CIA knows that. In 1978, there was something called the Church Committee, and it was a Senate investigation of all the dirty deeds the CIA did, from assassination attempt on Castro's to overthrowing governments in Central America, to all their dirty deeds, and the shit hit the fan. So they know with that plausible deniability, yeah, it insulates the upper guys, but the CIA know that it's going to be their heads that roll when the shit does come out, hits the fan. Because Bush can say, gee, I don't know, I didn't know, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody steps forward and takes responsibility for this.
And here's
stuff,
another thing I don't think we talked about that Senator Udall couldn't believe. We find out that as early as 2001, the CIA's legal team circulated a memorandum describing a novel legal defense for their officers who might engage in the T word, torture. And as the senator observes to Jones, actually uses the word torture in the memorandum, in spite of there being laws against it, and before the agency had a single detainee. So Jones's rhetorical question to the senator was, how did the CIA know they needed to torture people before they even had one? So in that memorandum, they actually used the T word, even though they knew it was illegal. So there's another thing to add to my list of hindsight's 2020. No, I mean, and the senator says they actually used the word torture. Yeah. So there's no excuse.
I think it's a major case for, I don't know, somehow it's hard to imagine, bureaucracy as sprawling as the United States government, but really every single public servant needs to be their own advocate for the Constitution of the United States, and this lofty ideal is so quickly set by the wayside by this frenzied overreaction. I call it an overreaction to 9/11.
Well, look what we've seen it. Our two greatest presidents, I think, Lincoln and Roosevelt, both committed bad deeds during war. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, right? Roosevelt put all those Japanese Americans in concentration camps, right? And they weren't Japanese, they were Japanese Americans. So in times of war, civil or otherwise, we do crazy, irrational things. And like I say, those two, Lincoln and Roosevelt, FDR, my opinion is they were our two greatest presidents because they were at the helm when the country could have gone to shit. But they still committed grave errors, civil liberty-wise, both Lincoln and Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So in times of war, people panic and they do crazy things. Look at the Patriot Act, too, that Bush tried to push through by, saying that people, people's library cards.
What do you mean tried to? We definitely got a Patriot Act.
Yeah.
And it's full of some very loony stuff.
So
there's that failure in the chain of accountability. I honestly think the agents in the room, with the exception of those two fucking assholes, really felt like what they were doing was approved and understood at every step on the ladder, all the way up to the president. And I honestly believe that the president believed that everything that was happening was approved and figured out, and that if that, if when you do some what is it, iron filings, that they all line up in the correct way when you get put a magnet near them. If all these iron filings were lined up, this shit wouldn't have happened. It would have been clear. But everything's just like, again, this what I call the Swiss cheese of accountability. Now, that's our discussion of the accountability, like before and during. The accountability failure after some of the facts come out are equally weird and definitely featured in this film. This is our section titled "The Cover-Up and PR Damage Control." Now, in 2004, the events of Abu Ghraib became public, and that was check me if I'm wrong, that was army personnel abusing prisoners of war.
Yeah.
And instead of backing off of that, the CIA just really doubled down on their own techniques. And when the bad stuff started to hit the public light, there was no attempt to come forth and apologize and condemn, but to find further reasons and further rationales to say, no, this was important, this was necessary. And it's around 2004 that I think that waterboarding enters the public conscience. Very especially in 2011 with bin Laden's death. People like Rumsfeld and Cheney, as well as a bunch of others, use that opportunity to rush to the microphones and rush onto the cable TV channels and use that fact of, well, we got bin Laden, so what are you complaining about? They see that as like, oh, okay, now we have a big shield that'll just protect us from everything we did, because we can claim that it was all needed to do this very important thing. As I mentioned before, I don't think killing bin Laden was nearly as important as the United States government did. Also along the way here, DOJ did investigate, but eventually just rolled over, filed no charges at all. More lack of accountability. And as you said, 2012, just right the year after Osama bin Laden's killed, Zero Dark 30 comes out, which is probably, I don't think the way Catherine Bigelow intended, but it turns out to be a big fuel for the propaganda that the EIT program was warranted and well managed.
Okay, let's take a look at why DOJ didn't pursue it, because remember, Adam Driver kept calling that person on the phone to see how the progress was going with the DOJ. And he finally finds out that they don't have enough admissible evidence to convict anyone, in spite of Rodriguez destroying the tapes or the whole torture thing. Jones makes the following cynical conclusion that we could probably this is what I said to most government scandals. Number one, he said, right, if you go after contractors, they're indemnified. In other words, those two Air Force crackpots. Number two, if you go after the head of counterintelligence, he'll say he's following orders from the CIA director. Although I put in a caveat that the just following orders exercise should have been rendered disqualified, if not after the Nuremberg trials or My Lai. You see what I'm saying there? Remember the Nazis at the Nuremberg trial?
I do know that one. Can you brief me really quick on My Lai? I don't know that.
My Lai was Lieutenant Calley and his soldiers massacred
a village,
like 300 innocent civilians.
Vietnam?
In the village of My Lai.
Was that Vietnam?
Yeah, My Lai. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
My Lai Vietnam,
I've
Lieutenant
heard
Calley.
I've
He was
heard of it.
infamous,
I didn't know the name.
right? And so when they interviewed a lot of these people, a lot of them were saying, I was just following orders. I was just following orders. So that whole, if it wasn't disqualified with Nuremberg, to me, in my young life and knowledge of history, the My Lai massacre rendered it moot because, okay, you're in the military and you're given an order. Yes, you're supposed to follow that order. But if it's something that you view as immoral, you should have the right to disobey it and take your chances with the court martial or some judge or something else in our criminal justice system to say, I'm not going to follow that order. So that's why I say that as much as counterintelligence says he's following orders of the CIA, you don't always have to do that. And then they say the director would just cite the president, and the president will claim national security, not to mention the veil of plausible deniability created by him, by Condi Rice, and others, deliberately not telling him about the John Yoo redefinition of torture. So that's Adam Driver's cynical explanation. I forgot who it was to, about why the DOJ backed off.
Oh, I think it's in front of a room of people. This is the part of the film where the CIA has kind of got wind of what the report contains. In fact, they've read his full report and they're coming back and saying, "Well, here's the stuff you have to take out, and here's the stuff you can include." And they are talking about like, well, what I wish I had remembered the term, but they were going to use. Well, I think they just used the word pseudonyms. They were not going to name any actual people and just use pseudonyms. The CIA is like, no, because no, people could figure out who you're talking about. And he's like, well, the contractors, they're clearly, doing fucked up shit. And they say like, no, we got to protect those guys too. So in the end, they're not going to have even names or pseudonyms. So you wouldn't be able to connect anybody that did anything. And God, he's got the really good one. I think he puts this just to Feinstein's assistant, who was a nice little, nice little performance in this film. What would you think if you said, on such and such a date, blank was born, and on such and such a date, blank turned water into wine, and in such and such a date, blank was crucified and returned from the dead? How would you know that blank was the same person? So like, they didn't have to say, okay, it was Jesus in all of these three cases, but if they said it was like subject one, you would at least be able to connect that story. If you can't connect that story, even using, fictionalized, obfuscated names, you've got no story. You've got nothing.
Yeah.
Which is the huge big point of the film.
I thought Senator Udall's brilliant, ingenious tactic of highlighting the Senate report, which was the CIA's own internal one. I thought that was ingenious the way he did that.
Right. So yeah, let's go to our next section. Let's talk about the Panetta Review, which this film, in what I think maybe is kind of a weird way, like kind of highlights as the most dramatic part of the story. I don't necessarily think it is, but I could see how the storytellers in trying to craft it would do so. Leon Panetta served about 2 years as CIA director under Barack Obama. He was he was Obama's first CIA director. He oversaw the assassination plans of Osama bin Laden, and I think this is kind of a little off topic, but I kind of think it's interesting that he was nominated as Obama's Secretary of Defense before the assassination took place and confirmed by the Senate afterwards. This is just a matter of a few months, like 2 or 3 months. So I think it's interesting that the CIA director that planned the assassination, they already kind of had an exit strategy for him to be moved into a different department before the
Mhm.
assassination took place. You know,
And in case it failed, you mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's what this tells me. Because if you were 100% confident it was going to succeed, obviously you still want that guy still around because he can go like, "Hey, I planned the operation that got Osama bin Laden."
Yeah.
But instead, clearly they had doubts.
And they could ease them out that way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And still, but still, to a Secretary of Defense, that's
Sure.
I'm not even sure that's a demotion.
No. No. What do they call that? Moving you sideways or horizontally or
Yeah, CIA
that kind
director
of thing.
and then Secretary of Defense.
Yeah. He
Secretary
was a
of Defense
senator
actually
too.
might even be a step up. Oh yeah.
He was
So
a senator in Congress.
so as we say, like the important thing to know about this is during his time as CIA director, uh, do you remember the family jewels situation from earlier, like the 70s or 80s or something?
I'm not sure.
Shoot, Dave knows this stuff way better than me. There was in the 70s, I think there was a CIA director that came in and put together a report, an internal report, really with a critical eye of everything his predecessors had done at the CIA. And they called that they colloquially called that the family jewels. And those did come out eventually. They weren't meant to. They were meant to be more of an internal CIA review. This is the same kind of situation as that. Dedicated listeners to the podcast will know that we've referenced the Family Jewels files numerous times. The Panetta review is very similar to that. He's coming in and he's putting together an internal review of what his predecessors have done, and he's basically coming up with all the conclusions that this film wants us to reach, which is that the EIT program didn't work, was poorly managed, and was also unnecessary in the first place. So now that file exists somewhere in the CIA. Again, the way Daniel Jones gets this file in the movie, we just see him sitting at his computer. He's looking at his screen, and he looks over to one of his colleagues and he says, "Hey, are you guys seeing this? This just came up." And it's the Panetta review. And it basically supports all of his claims. It shows that the CIA fundamentally knows and I guess tacitly agrees with all of the criticisms of the EIT program.
Kind of
Again,
like almost analogous to what I said the Pentagon Papers was.
yes.
Analogous to that. And they still went ahead and did it anyway.
Although, to your knowledge, were the Pentagon Papers meant to be publicized, or was it an internal document that was leaked?
No, you're right. It was meant to. It was meant for Secretary of Defense McNamara to learn about Vietnam and whether we should escalate it or not.
Right.
And it gave chapter and verse why we shouldn't and why it was a quagmire and it was unwinnable. But they went ahead and did it anyway. It was an internal review. It came out later. See, Daniel Ellsberg later released them, right? It was a whole court case, too. He was on the run. He was making copies of them. Got it to the New York Times and the Washington Post. The Nixon administration was trying to get them to stop it, cease and desist. There was a big court case that it could be published. So it was in the New York Times. I remember that. Daniel Ellsberg was on the run and was facing jail time. And he's the one that released them. He worked for the Rand Corporation. He was a former Marine. And he started seeing this review and he said, "Oh my God, I got to get this out there." And there's a whole movie on it too. It might be called The Pentagon Papers.
If you're talking about the documentary where the filmmaker got McNamara to sit down and address the camera directly,
that's an excellent one too. But I think there's also a dramatic one with Ellsberg. T-shirt.
that
But yeah, I know the one you're thinking of. That's excellent.
that
Yeah.
documentary with McNamara addressing the camera directly is, I think, must watch for any American citizen.
And he was trying to purge his book too since then. It's pathetic and it's sad. He's trying to purge his soul with his apologies, but those veterans don't want to hear it. It's like, we don't want to hear it. You know, the Vietnam veterans who have seen that.
Yeah, yeah.
Why didn't you say something, especially when LBJ relieved him back in the 60s? He used to work for Ford Motor Corporation. Then LBJ gave him another job. I want to say it was the UN or something. I'm not sure. But he remained silent all those critical years during the war. And then many decades after the war was over, he does this whole mea culpa in books and films. And it's like the Vietnam veterans, which I don't blame them. It's like, I don't want to hear it now. Why didn't you speak up when you could have done something?
Sure. Get back to this Panetta review. The way that it shows up in the film is a little dicey, in my opinion, because like we talked about before, like the CIA freaks out when, okay, so he gets it, right? I'll just first say what we see in the film. In the film, we see he just finds it on the computers that the CIA is providing him files to. They're just like uploading stuff. I mean, the place is air gapped, so there's probably a technician that brings in a hard drive every morning and like physically uploads new files. But according to the film, the CIA gave it to him, just along with everything else. But when they find out he has it, they flip the fuck out and get very upset, and they go after him hard. Because, you know, again, like the Panetta review, just basically it validates the report. You know, it lines up what the CIA said internally with what Jones is also saying happened.
Which would have been fine if they didn't deny it.
Right. So real quick, I just want to put some pins in on like what might have actually happened, even though I'd said at the top of the show that's not really my purview. But I wonder if the film is lying to us a little bit. I wonder if Jones actually got that report from a source that was illegitimate, which is what the CIA is claiming. I also wonder if you know, like we have the notion of someone at the CIA is supposed to be vetting this stuff and stopping certain documents from getting to Jones in the first place. We also know, or we're given to believe, that there are a lot of, you know, loyal, patriotic people at the CIA that very much disagree with and feel deeply uncomfortable with the EIT program. One of my thoughts is like maybe one of those people that was in charge of vetting looked at it and said, you know what? This is just going to be like my little subtle little bit of whistleblowing. Like, I'm going to let this one go through because they thought it was important enough. I think there's a lot of possibilities, but it is kind of the reason I spend so much time like racking my brain about this is because my understanding of document handling within the CIA is that it's fucking tight. Like, they know every document. Like, they don't just know who wrote it and all the names that are in it, but every time someone reads it or is allowed to read it, that goes into a log. You know, like they know who's looked at it, who's been given a copy, blah, blah, blah. And so much of this stuff with the Panetta review, it's very difficult for me to square with my understanding of how document handling at least is supposed to be done at the CIA. I am really kind of like weirded out about the fact that he just prints it out and walks out of that place with it in his attaché case, and then he's not searched. In all the other movies that I've seen where and these are, you know, dramatized movies that are not even trying to be realistic. Some of them are trying to be historical. But these secure facilities and the handling of secure documents is so much more tightly regulated than what we see.
But it shows him right from the beginning. He goes in and out, and he has that conversation with the guy at the desk that asks him all those questions, right? That goes through the motions. And the very last time when he does have the Panetta report in his briefcase, he doesn't actually say, I don't have it. He says, have a good night, right?
Yeah.
but it kind of shows the lack of data. You know, they're
I don't think it's
friends and
supposed
they're
to
going
work that
through.
way.
Yeah, but people are human.
That's true.
Yeah.
But I also think it's kind of fuel for my little pet theory that maybe he actually didn't get it from there,
Yeah.
and that the movie is
Hey,
covering for Jones.
could be. Yep.
Because actually, I mean, the fact of him taking, and let's not sugarcoat it, the fact of him taking that file out of that office, I think actually does constitute treason and espionage.
That's what Daniel Ellsberg did. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's why the shit hit the fan when Daniel Ellsberg took it out and made copies of it for weeks and then turned it over to the New York Times. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's why Daniel Ellsberg almost landed in jail until he got it to the New York Times. The New York Times took it to court, and the court ruled in their favor. But, yeah.
So when Jones finds the Panetta report, he decides it might be of later potential value. That's why he makes a printout of it, hides it in his desk. It's Udall, Senator Udall, also a member of Feinstein-led Senate Intelligence Committee, that at this point he's hearing enough that he really wants to push this report forward. He's just saying we just are missing like a little bit of piece of something. Like if there was some kind of documentation that we had that said that the CIA knew, basically he's, without knowing it, he's asking for something like the Panetta Review. Jones says, well, in fact, Senator, I do have something like that. And he gives it to Udall.
So, yeah, it's ingenious. What he does is that the CIA, he highlights the accuracy of Jones's report by saying how pleased he is that it reflected the CIA's own internal study that put them in an awkward position of contradicting their own report if they protested Jones's report, which was ingenious.
Yeah, it does. It does anger Feinstein. I'm kind of weirded out that Jones blindsided her by not telling her that he was going to give this to Udall. It looks like she did know about it from her response on screen. I wasn't 100% sure. So
she sets him straight a couple times when she thinks he oversteps his bounds a little bit.
Yeah,
and then he backs off.
Well, I think she smartly leaves her assistant to do that for her. You know, she just leaves.
Well, then he's right.
She makes her exit from the room with a cryptic remark where he's like, "What the fuck was that?" And it's the assistant that has to lay it out for him, and say, "Like, look,
but after that, when
it's not your name that's going on this report."
When he snaps at the assistant in front of her, that's when she says, "Are you working for me or the report?" And be careful before you answer that.
Oh yeah.
And then he backs off.
Again, national treasure, Annette Bening.
And I think that goes to show how obsessive he got. They make a big deal about, they show that he doesn't have family obligations where the other folks do. He doesn't even know that it's Thanksgiving. He's totally wrapped up in this to the point of obsession. So I think that's part of it too, that he has no life but that. And that John Hamm, I think that's his name from Mad Men, he tries to talk him, you know, the guy from the Obama administration.
So in this film, the important thing about Udall, demonstrating that the Panetta Review has gotten out of its cage, so to speak, the CIA freaks the fuck out about this, and they make an important and disastrous blunder. I think it's my number one worst tradecraft of the film, where they go into the skiff, that room that is the agreed upon interface between the CIA and the Senate, and they search it, and they grab all of Jones's files, and because they're not, I don't know. Well, I guess we're meant to think it's because the CIA is not dumb, and if they know that if Udall has the report, that he probably got it from Jones, that it leaked through the skiff. And so they raid the skiff, which is essentially the CIA spying on the Senate. Full stop, unconstitutional as fuck. I'll call this minus America points for the CIA even thinking this was permissible for a moment. Like, this is literally the CIA not only spying on the American people, which they're not allowed to do. This is the CIA spying on the American fucking government.
United States Senate. And Feinstein says that to whatever his name is, the new CIA director. Yeah.
Right. So that's really the real importance of the Panetta Review in this film. I mean, there's more notes we have to talk about this here. This is immediately after Obama got reelected and had put a guy named Brennan up for CIA director. He's also a character that the film paints in a pretty villainous light, I think. To be clear, Brennan did come out and publicly admit that the CIA now this didn't show up in the movie, but in reality, I think it was just like 2 months that it took for him to come out and publicly apologize for and say this was a violation and shouldn't have happened. So there's that. Of course, you note that Brennan claims he's got documents that back up his claim that the EIT program did help save lives. But Jones has a brilliant response for that. This was your note.
Yep. Yeah. He says, well, how could that be when it was CIA information that we had? And we said we were told we'd have all relevant information. And then he comes back and said, basically, you don't think we'd give you everything.
Right, but that was the agreement that you would give us everything.
Right. And that's where you think he lied. It wasn't that he withheld anything. You think he lied about it.
I think he's lying about having withheld the having secret documents that he didn't.
Yeah, to back up his thesis that EIT worked and it wasn't as bad as the report made it out to be. Yeah, to back that up. He claims he had information to back that up. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a sharp exchange in which, CIA guys like saying like, "Hey, Jones, if you have any information that didn't come from us, then you're in violation of the agreement because you're not supposed to be interviewing. Your report is supposed to be entirely based on the information that we give you." And Jones is saying, well, in that case, you can't come at me and say that I don't have all the information, because if I don't have all the information, then you're withholding something. So someone here is full of shit. The film definitely is pointing at Brennan. And really good catch, I thought, on your part. In real life, real quick, Brennan does claim that he opposed waterboarding. Although,
but then Jones points out that he was involved right from the beginning and knew all about it.
Well, not necessarily right. Not necessarily right from the beginning. We have had a few turnovers of CIA directors.
No, not as head, but he was involved in the CIA during the whole thing.
Right, of course. Jones comes back, and I mean, Brennan's statement is that he only opposed it in like private conversations with people. But Jones states in the film, like, I just went through 5 years of your emails, and you didn't mention your objections once on the record.
Yeah.
So your your objections they're meaningless unless you're willing to put them in writing, right?
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, this is right at 1 hour 7 minutes of the film, and it's really the heart of the matter, I think, of the story of this movie. Here we have Brennan admitting their problems and mistakes, but disputes two key points. He disputes that the program was mismanaged and ineffective, and he disputes that the CIA misled the press, the White House, and the Congress regarding the program. Those two things, his two objections,
virtually everything,
are the reason that we took these like 1 and 2 at a time. Like our second section of this podcast was talking about how no, the program was mismanaged. It was ineffective.
That's virtually, when he's saying that, is virtually the whole report in those two abbreviated objections. You could say that those two things were basically everything Jones found.
Mm. So let's see. We got to the breach. Jones gets attacked, kind of like personally. The CIA decides like we're gonna try to discredit him. There's a whole threat program against him.
Like they did to Daniel Ellsberg.
Of course. So now they're gonna charge this guy with unconstitutional activities, where the DOJ, is just like happy to say we don't have any evidence. But right now, I mean, it is just a threat, and a threat is all you really need, possibly, to just discredit this guy, throw shade. In one of, I think the film's best scenes, it's kind of foreshadowed or prequeled at the beginning of the film. Corey Stoll, who I'm starting to think might be one of the best character actors of my generation, plays as Daniel Jones' lawyer. And here's a good time for me to highlight something I really appreciate about this film is that Jones does obey the edicts and the agreement between the Senate and the CIA, is that he's not allowed to talk to anybody outside of those two agencies about his report. That puts him in a tricky situation. When he's has conversations with Matthew Reese, who plays the New York Times reporter, and also even when talking to his own like possible private attorney, he has to navigate this like, they're asking him questions about what's going on. He's like, I can't answer that, and he uses
that's
like,
to his credit.
It is, and it's also just to the movie's credit, and I just, it's something I really appreciated, not only as far as like storytelling, but also as I don't know, I just liked it.
Makes him more of an honorable protagonist.
Yeah. Especially the line where when he's talking to Matthew Reese, who's called in, because like his lawyer, after hearing what he can hear about the situation, he says like, okay, dude, you're in a lot of trouble here, and this is going to be really fucking expensive for you. I don't think you actually have a legal problem here. I think you have a daylight problem, and I think people that could solve that. It's a great line. It leads Jones to meet again with the New York Times reporter. And again, say very little and nothing that violates his conditions of what he's allowed to say. When Matthew Reese presses him on it, we get another great line is like, dude, you're the New York Times, intelligence correspondent. You can figure out the rest. And he's right. Reese can figure out the rest. And so I think we get, there's a New York Times article that comes out after the Matthew Reese character does some more of his investigation. And they meet before we finalize the film and get out of there with what is the remnants of the report that are going to come out to public. There's that parking garage scene.
The New York Times reporter's question to Jones when he's asked him why, if the CIA knew of the ineffectiveness of torture, they pursued it anyway. And Jones gives him his fear and shame explanation, which I thought was pretty interesting. And he said the CIA felt fear and shame after 9/11, but fear and shame don't make for better policy decisions. And the fact that the people who we captured didn't look like us or believe in the same things we do made it that much easier to do the things we did. So once the CIA program started, they had to keep telling people it worked, even if it wasn't true. Their own position was that if it didn't work, it was illegal. So they misrepresented the results.
Yep. Well, it's like that Gina Haspel Bernadette comment is like, in retrospect, you couldn't actually determine whether it was legal or not until you knew what the result was. And that's not
Yeah.
how that shit's supposed to happen.
I think too what he's saying in here, and it's something we don't often talk about, is that in any conflict wherever and we try to dehumanize the enemy, and some of the racist things that were called the Viet Cong, right?
mhm.
And the Germans, the Russians, and these people, some of the horrible things that have been said about Middle Eastern people, we try to, in all wars, you try to dehumanize the enemy, right? And when he said people don't look like us or believe in the things we do, right? They don't look like us. As George Carlin said, we don't do much anymore but bomb the shit out of brown people, you know, um, and don't believe in the same things we do. Okay, different religion. I think that's saying a lot. In other words, it's easy to bomb the shit out of people that don't look like us and believe in the same things we do. And you see an interesting thing right now with going on, I think, with Ukraine. And I think some of the difference those Ukrainian white refugees are treated than some of the ones south of the border or from the Middle
People
East.
from Syria, and Yemen, two very brutal wars, much more brutal than what's going on in Ukraine, have been going on for a lot longer, but they're brown people.
Right.
We don't see them on the news. Ukrainians uniquely look exactly like us. They're fucking,
Yep.
they're white Christians. They're white middle class Christians.
It's kind of the elephant in the room. And I think Jones is saying a lot like us. They don't look like us. They're brown skin. They don't believe in the same things we do. They're Islamic and not Christian. And I think that's saying a lot with how we wage war and treat prisoners, and the whole torture thing as well.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, and I agree, sadly, that it is really hard for me to imagine this torture program having been applied to white middle class Christians of another country,
Yep.
even one that we were at war
Yep.
with, even one that had attacked us, even one that had committed a terrorist attack on the scale of 9/11 against us. I just don't believe
Yep.
it. Yeah. Before we go to debriefing on this film, I do want to make just a few notes on assertions that are made in this film that might be challenged by the real people that are portrayed in the film. Just a reminder, at least my analysis of this film is as a piece of media. Don't rely on me to know the truth of what actually happened. First off, from my understanding, Gina Haspel, who's renamed as Bernadette in this film, she was, in fact, it's not just from my understanding, was promoted as our first female CIA director. And that the reason she was put up for the job was that the CIA wanted someone that did know all of the dirty, fucked up shit that we did and was intimately familiar with it, but was also equally committed to making sure that shit never happened again. Of course, number one job is protect the blue, just like the cops have that line, like they just will protect each other, like no matter what fucked up shit they do.
Line.
Yeah. But I just want to say that's my understanding. I also want to say CIA Director Brennan, who's also painted pretty villainous in this film. It is a fact, let's not forget, he did very quickly admit that the CIA intrusion on the Senate files was illegal and ill-advised. Like it only took him two months to
Right, but that's when really Feinstein came at him with the whole checks and balances thing and put him in a corner.
Sure. I don't want to say it's I'm not trying to say it was like entirely altruistic on his part. Maybe it was just like people had the screws in on him, but that horrible very obviously unconstitutional event. As soon as people got any wind of that, that's why that's going to make just the fact they even did it or even thought for a second it was
Yeah.
an okay idea is going to make
Yeah.
worse things. Um, finally, just a note about the two guys that are painted the worst in this film, possibly, and that's James E. Mitchell and his partner. Give me a second while I scroll up to the top of my notes. It was Mitchell and Bruce Jessen. Um, I just thought like they're painted as so fucking slime. Like there's even that scene where they're cackling over champagne in their private jet and counting up all the money that they made.
They did everything but twirl their mustache.
Exactly. Uh, I feel I would feel bad about not at least mentioning like listeners that are sufficiently interested in finding out the whole truth of everything. Just please consider that he did co-write a book in 2016. The title is going to tell you maybe everything you need to know about the bias of this book. It's called Enhanced Interrogation Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. I haven't read the book. I did read several reviews of it. I found one that I found was the most unbiased possible. He still does come off as kind of trying to cover his ass, but I just think that I just want to say, sorry for making such a point of this. Anybody that's completely interested in knowing the whole picture, I think you would have to hear his side of the story. Whether you decide that it's a pile of bullshit or not. But if you're not willing to listen to the even entertain the observations of the people you disagree with, then that's where the country gets into real trouble. We're off to debriefing unless you want to.
Nope. No, I'm just saying if he really wanted more folks to read it and give his side of the story, that was not a good title to choose.
No shit. That is a total raw red meat. That's how I found so much problems finding what I consider to be an unbiased review of the book, because 90% of the shit I found was like people saying like, "Hey, yeah, no, if you read this book, then you'll understand. You'll understand all this fucking CIA bullshit." Bunch of fucking MAGA people. MAGA people, please keep listening to my podcast.
Agents, please report for debriefing on this operation. The director will see you now.
I like movies that don't have spy movies that don't necessarily have car chases and shoot 'em ups, although I do appreciate those. I like this one because I thought it told a gripping morality play about who we are, who we aspire to be, in spite of our enemies. A lot of people say, "Oh, you got to fight fire with fire. If they're torturing us, we got to torture them." So many times, and I think this shows this, the real enemy turns out to be ourselves when we stray from our ideals. So I really would give it a 5 for its well-executed story delivered without sensationalism, but also its warning and reminder to us of who we are and who we aspire to be in these troubling times when our democracy seems to be at risk on so many fronts.
Well said. I'm, I appreciate the film for the same reasons as you. I don't appreciate it as much as you do. I didn't enjoy watching this film. I can see why a lot of people didn't really grab onto it. It's an important film. I didn't find it particularly enjoyable. It's one of those cases where I enjoyed learning more about these events through the film than I did actually as something I would want to watch. I definitely don't want to see it again. I kind of think I would rather this had been a documentary. I would rather see all this effort and all this money have been put into hearing John Brennan's side of the story, interviews with John Yoo, interviews with Mitchell and the other guy. I think the torture scenes are over the top, and if I'm wrong for believing that they're over the top in the way they're represented, I don't dispute the shit happened. I just think they're overly dramatized. That's my suspicion. Mitchell's performance is so weird to me. He's intentionally slimy at any point. Like he doesn't set the same tone, I think, as the rest of the actors. And
He's got that growl to his voice too. Is he the one with the growl to his voice?
He's the bearded guy that really seems to be enjoying himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his performance, if at any time the director didn't have, I think it's the director allowing that actor to give that kind of ultra, like you said, mustache twirling performance that makes me somewhat question the bias of the director. You know, I mean, it's his performance more than anything that really shows to me a very strong bias of the director. And maybe that guy was that bad of an asshole, but portraying him as such, like you said, doesn't bring, like, it's one of the reasons, like you said, like the people that need to see this film won't. That kind of performance is one of the major reasons why.
Well, I also look at it a little differently too. And it was one of my bad tradecraft was, what did I say about that?
Well, all right. While you're looking it up, I can just wrap it up. Would have been better as a documentary, 2 stars. All right. Now, tradecraft.
The fact, to me, worse than them, the fact that the CIA allowed itself to be manipulated by those 2 crackpots who had, I mean, all you'd have to do, they find out in the end they had real junk science, and they successfully peddled their EIT program. And it's because the CIA took them on because they said what they wanted to hear. They wanted to embrace that kind of thing, so they did. So I don't find as much fault with those 2 crackpots. There's always crackpots out there like that. To me, the CIA should have been better about researching them and not have been manipulated by them.
It was that was 100% on my list. Didn't make my top 3. Let me give my worst 3, and then you can run through your worst 5, because you have failed to understand the assignment. You got to narrow it down to 3.
It was presumptuous of me, wasn't it?
All right. Well, but if you got 5, I can't stop you. Okay. But my worst 3, which I didn't get to put in the document, so I got to read off my book here. Worst. Oh yeah, the document handling. It doesn't match anything that I believe happens in real life for a bunch of reasons, which I mentioned. My number 2 is the CIA raid on the Senate. Just again, I already litigated this. I can't believe they made that fucking stupid of a mistake. And my number 1 is absolutely 183 times. Are you fucking kidding me? That it takes you 183 tries of doing something and it not working. Mm-hmm. I mean, how big of a red flag do you want?
5 was the CIA exaggerated Subdaya's importance as number 3 or 4 in Al-Qaeda to justify going ahead with EIT, even though he wasn't part of Al-Qaeda leadership at all. Okay, that was 5. 4, the CIA, I said this, allowed itself to be manipulated by those 2 Air Force crackpots who successfully peddled their EIT program with questionable scientific research.
Came very close to making my top 3. What are your actually top 3?
The CIA unlawfully searched the Senate computers in violation of separation of powers.
Same as my number 2.
Number 2, the intelligence that the CIA ignored linking KSM to bin Laden in not only not connecting the dots to thwart 9/11, but also not acting on paying the $2,000 to Asset X, who claimed to have direct asset access to KSM when they did pay him the 2 years later, admitted his connection to KSM, and that had nothing to do with EIT. My worst tradecraft was the whole torture program to begin with. Not only because they knew it was not only ineffective but inhumane, and it took them 119 detainees before they would stop it and conclude that in the future they should use rapport building that they already knew the FBI talked about, and that at least for the FBI had using and advocating beforehand only for the CIA to sneer at and ignore, only to come around after 119 detainees were put through EIT, where at least a quarter of them should never have been detained.
On to my best tradecraft. I struggled to find good tradecraft in this film, not due to the facts film's lack of realism, but just that tradecraft is not really the focus of this film. My number 3 just goes to the SCIF, the Secure Compartmented Intelligence Facility. I just like it as a concept. As I've said before, I have some doubts about the film's portrayal about the actual integrity of this room, but as a concept, this kind of single interface room between two agencies, like all intelligence needs to either come in or out of this one spot, seems like a great way to manage sensitive information and have yeah, again, not super trade crafty, but some of my favorite scenes in this movie were the little actor scenes of where Daniel Jones needs to communicate certain information to the reporter or to his lawyer, but can't. Is very strict about the things he can and cannot say, and uses hand gestures to indicate like I can't answer that. And maneuver the conversation in a way so that it just was fun. For me, number 1, again, I really tried hard. I really wanted to try to commit to finding my top 3 without using this one, but I couldn't. And it's something that doesn't even happen in the film. It's just something that happened that just gets described as having happened, but it's so good. And that's the FBI's tape trick that they used on Zubaida. Essentially, they had a phone tap on him. Okay. There was one time he left the phone off the hook for an extended period of time. They got a recording of that. They played that recording for him and showed him a big box full of tapes, and let him draw his own conclusions that meant that his house was bugged and that he had no reason to try to conceal anything because they had him and they knew everything. But of course, those tapes were blank. It's genius. It's fun. I'd like to see a movie where we actually get to see that happen. Yeah.
Also, I would say ironic because not only are they building rapport, they're using their wits and psychology, unlike, ironically, those 2 crackpot psychologists who did not use psychology but resorted to brute force. So there's a little irony there. The FBI, Sofan, used his wits and psychology to pull that off. And the 2 psychologists, ironically, did not. They used brute force. So there's an irony there.
That is a good use of the word. Your 3 best.
Okay. My 3rd, I really liked the way that Senator Udall, his ingenious tactic of highlighting the accuracy of the Jones Senate report by saying how it reflected the CIA's own internal study that put them in an awkward position of contradicting their own report when protesting the Senate report. He got that out in the open, and that was ingenious, I thought.
I like it.
Number 2 was when Jones secretly moved a copy of a portion of the Panetta Review, which was the CIA's own internal review that mirrored the Senate review, into a safe in the Senate Hart building. Okay, that I think you could call tradecraft. And best tradecraft number 1.
It qualifies.
Jones Jones and his committee's dogged and unrelenting research of his 6,200-page report that, as the New York Times reporter characterized as being told to build a boat that they had no intention of sailing. He gets an E for effort for that. They got an abbreviated portion of it, but those are my three.
Make it this is a, not strictly speaking a spy film, and it's just tangential. Giving it a proper park bench rating is going to be kind of difficult, and we might have to fudge the rules a little bit.
I get that. I want to go back to something, though, you said before about how most spy movies are trying to conceal something. And on face value, this one doesn't look like it is. However, when you look at our main character, the Adam Driver character, he's concealing, in a big way, his intent. Down deep, he wants to get this thing out, but he's struggling within himself. Now, maybe you might think this is a reach for concealment, but he's struggling within himself what to do. And in the end, you and I both admire the fact that he does not give it to the New York Times. But
I'm actually
with
really on the
his
fence about that one.
with his hiding the Panetta report, right? When he put that aside, that's concealing something. And I would argue that he's concealing and wrestling with his intent to just blow the thing, get the thing out there, like putting that ray of light or sunshine on it that his lawyer told him. So I think you can rationalize a bit that there was that bit of concealment, tradecraft there, the wrestling within himself, and when he tried to hide that bit in the drawer. It's beyond, to me, a spy movie. It's more of a morality play.
That's why it's going to be tricky to rate. Try it this way. The Report versus Munich. Which is a more accurate portrayal of tradecraft?
Munich actually had more tradecraft, so that's going to win. Like you just listed all those other movies where this doesn't have much tradecraft.
Same question for Argo.
Yeah, there's more tradecraft because they're working at the concealing and what they're going to do and how they're going to try to get those hostages out of there. So the whole thing is.
So that's my rationale for just dinging it just a half a point below those films. We're still giving it the respect of being realistic. We still have definitely a very high star rating from you. So it's notes for the blank report. And next month, guys, we're gonna get started on a classic. We're gonna get back to our core roots of what our fans really seem to be interested in, which is the cool classic John Le Carré stuff. We're finally gonna do The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, so look forward to that. And I will look forward to talking with Fred about that one, probably in about a month.
Sounds good.
All right.
It's been fun.
Later, nerds.
Yep. Night.
Protocol 9 initiated. This podcast will self-destruct in 20 seconds. The preceding transmission sampled the songs Ice Cold by Audionautics, Enter the Party by Kevin MacLeod, and sound effects from freesound.org. Attributions and links are found at spieslikeus.net. Editing by Todd Hostetler.